Early 20th century. Political background. World War I, 1914 up to 1918. World War II, 1939 up till 1945. And a Victorian period, 1837 up till 1901. Edwardian era begins in the year 1901 and ended in the year 1910, followed by Georgian era, which began in the year 1910 and lasted up till 1936. Advent of new technologies, fervor for art, and new fashion styles. Now, World War One. World War One was an international conflict. The war was between Central Powers against the Allies. Now, Central Powers were mainly Germany, Austria, Hungary, and Turkey, and they were against Allies, which were France, Great Britain, Russia, Italy, Japan, and from 1917, USA also participated. It ended with the defeat of Central Powers and victory of the Allies. The war resulted in lot of destruction and slaughter at large scale. Then came World War II. World War II was a conflict that involved virtually every part of the world during the years 1939 up till 1945. It included Axis powers, which were Germany, Italy, Japan, and the Allies, France, Great Britain, the United States, Soviet Union, and to a lesser extent, China. It also resulted in large number of deaths. It was the bloodiest conflict as well as the largest war in history. It marked the decisive shift of power in the world away from the states of Western Europe and toward the United States and Soviet Union. After this Cold War era continued, or we can say it began immediately after World War II. Now, then we can also say the second thing that was major in the early 20th century was the Victorian era ended. The Victorian era, which began in the year 1837, ended with the demise of Queen Victoria in the year 1901. Now, what were the changes that took place? The Industrial Revolution. One of the greatest factor we can see is Industrial Revolution. Why? Because now this era had rapid development and change, and we can see shift from agricultural country to an urban industrial one. We can see the introduction and innovations, for example, mass production, steam engines, railways, sewing machines, gas, electric light, and all sorts of inventions that changed the society. Railway also being one of the inventions, or we can say one of the factor that hugely influenced this era. Second factor would be population growth and migration. Now, between 1801 and 1871 alone, the population of United Kingdom doubled. Migrations in both directions was a feature of Victorian life. Many Britons left the UK for North America or for the colonies in search of better opportunity. And we can see that Irish poor formed a large number of these migrants. And this happened because Irish potato famine, which occurred in 1845, hugely affected the Irish people. So they moved to England or Scotland or any place abroad in search of opportunities. Then our next factor would be social reforms. We can see many campaigns by people, for example, by Earl of Shaftesbury and the parliamentary commissions that took place. So social reforms was one of the major factor as well of this era. The rise of middle class. Now, society, we can see that middle class came to the surface a lot. Middle class has always existed, but this time we can see the burgeoning of middle classes. And a growth of democracy also occurred during this time. And a rise in middle class also sort of it introduced mass production and consumerism in the society. And we can also see growth of democracy and expansion of empire. Before the start of 19th century, Britain had already lost her American empire and was acquiring another in India. So we can say, and one important factor which we have to keep in mind is also the Great Exhibition of 1851, we remember, which displayed the wonders of both industry and empire. So this time, the empire, or we can say the imperialism, continued. Next came the Edwardian era. Edwardian era was a period of great social change. The growth of leisure pursuits continued, class system and disparity between rich and poor, and one of the paradoxical or rather contrasting feature we can see, spirit of socialism emerged among all this, and fervor for art and fashion. And imperial domination as always continued, and the power for luxury and elite continued as well. And we can say that distinction between highbrow and popular art was more defined or was more acute at this particular time. Now, Art Nouveau. Art Nouveau is a decorative style. It is an international style of art, architecture, and applied art, especially the decorative arts. It is ornamental style of art that flourished between the time span of 1890 and 1910 throughout Europe and the United States. Art Nouveau is characterized by its use of long, sinuous organic line and was employed most often in architecture, interior design, jewelry, glass design, posters, and illustrations. And it holds a certain affinity with pre-Raphaelites and decadence. By the end of World War One, Art Nouveau had dissipated as a force in the art world. Modernist movements took its place, most notably Art Deco. And later on, we see Imagism and other movements which took place. Other movements which took place. Now, Edwardian fashion. Let's talk about Edwardian fashion to conclude this video because we are talking inception, we are talking early 20th century. Now what was fashion during this era, during Edwardian era? Edwardian fashion from the late 1800s continued to influence the early 1900s. So we can see that there is a certain influence. Women still wore corsets and long skirts. Men still wore suits. A complete wardrobe included hats and gloves, and for women, often an umbrella, as you can see in these pictures, the typical attire of Edwardian period. King Edward, we can see there was certain influence of emperor as well, because King Edward loved to travel, setting his style influenced by the art and fashions of continental Europe. So he also greatly influenced the public or the society of that time. And during Edwardian period, Edwardian society held great enthusiasm for art and fashions. And Edwardian period is imagined for its summer afternoons and garden parties and all these parties and basking under a sun, enjoying the highbrow culture, art exhibitions, and promenades, and all these things. So this was about Edwardian society and the events that occurred during early 20th century. Next, we'll continue about writers of early 20th century. Thank